You used to explain yourself. Over and over, you'd defend your tone, your silence, your boundaries, your needs. You'd overthink your text messages, your pauses in conversation, your decisions to pull back when things didn't feel right. You believed peace meant keeping everyone else comfortable, even if it meant sacrificing yourself. But then something changed. You didn't explode. You didn't ghost. You didn't issue some dramatic warning or deliver a final monologue. You just stopped feeding the fire. You stepped back. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, you detached. And that's when the panic began. Not yours, theirs. Suddenly, the people who once ignored your pain started noticing your silence. The ones who took you for granted now chase your approval. The ones who mocked your emotions are suddenly asking what's wrong. The chaos you once tried to fix is now flailing because you're no longer holding it together. And now you have to ask yourself, why do they only panic when you find peace? Why is your emotional detachment more dangerous to them than your suffering ever was? You thought they wanted love. You thought they wanted connection. You thought they cared about you. But now, in your absence, the truth is screaming louder than any confrontation ever could. They weren't attached to your soul. They were attached to your reaction. As long as you kept explaining, apologizing, trying, they felt powerful. As long as your emotions revolved around them, they felt important. As long as you kept playing your role, the fixer, the empath, the overfunctioner, they never had to face themselves. But when you go quiet, the mirror turns, and suddenly, they're left with only their own reflection. So here is the great and painful question. Who were you emotionally sustaining while they were draining you dry? And when you stopped offering your energy, your empathy, your endless forgiveness, why did they lose balance? Could it be that your suffering was never the problem for them? It was your detachment that shattered the illusion. Because peace, real peace, is loud in a room built on dysfunction. It terrifies those who fed on your chaos. So ask yourself, when you finally chose emotional detachment, who panicked? And more importantly, why does that panic reveal more truth than any apology ever could? The moment you start emotionally detaching, something deeper is exposed, something old, ancient even. It doesn't begin with the people who panic now. It begins with the roles you were conditioned to play long before. You knew how to speak your needs. You see, the root of the problem isn't just emotional dependency, it's identity entanglement. Somewhere along the line, you learned that your value was tied to how well you could manage the emotional climate of others. Maybe you were the child who kept the peace when the house felt like a minefield. Maybe you were the partner who softened your truth so someone else didn't spiral. Or the friend who always listened, but was never really heard. Carl Jung might call this the tyranny of the persona, the mask we wear to survive in a world that rarely welcomes the full force of our authentic self. And when that mask is built on emotional overfunctioning, you lose sight of who you are beneath it. You become the mirror in everyone else's funhouse. You contort yourself into empathy. You apologize for existing too loudly, too emotionally, too honestly. And here's the tragedy. You believe that your emotional availability was love. You believe that your capacity to absorb others' pain was strength. You believe that if you could just be enough for them, they would finally stay, finally change, finally see you. But what if they never wanted to see you? What if they only wanted the version of you that kept their own demons asleep? Philosophically, this isn't new. Schopenhauer believed that most human relationships are not connections of essence, but of use, transactions disguised as affection, and your emotional labor was their currency. Gabor Maté would tell you that you adapted your entire emotional blueprint to preserve attachment at the cost of authenticity. That your anxiety, your guilt, your exhaustion, these weren't flaws, but survival mechanisms crafted in the crucible of early emotional deprivation. You became the emotional anchor, and they became dependent on your presence, not to love you, but to avoid themselves. Because when you were constantly reacting, explaining, overfunctioning, you gave them something more powerful than love: distraction. They didn't have to look in the mirror. They didn't have to question their behavior. They didn't have to grow. You became the emotional scapegoat for their unhealed wounds. And the problem is, it felt like love. Because love, for many of us, was never clean. It was attachment soaked in fear. It was connection bound by guilt. It was loyalty to dysfunction. So now, when you detach, not out of malice, but out of necessity, it unearths everything they never wanted to face. Their panic is not about losing you. It's about losing their shield from themselves. This is why silence is so powerful. It breaks the pattern. It disrupts the performance. It exposes the structure beneath the emotional theater. And if you dare to go even deeper, if you sit with the discomfort of not reacting, you begin to realize that your entire nervous system was wired to serve, to appease, to perform. You weren't just emotionally involved. You were emotionally enslaved. The hidden problem isn't just that you gave too much. It's that they expected you to, and you believed it was your job. But now, with your emotional detachment, something holy begins to emerge. Clarity, not just about them, but about you, about the role you played, about the price you paid, about the life you want to reclaim. Because the moment you detach, you don't just change the dynamic. You shatter the spell, and the ones who panic, they were never looking for your soul. They were only ever feeding off your silence. The detachment was quiet. No dramatic exits. No confrontations. Just a stillness, where your emotional flood used to be. And yet, everything changed. Because emotional detachment is not passive. It is a seismic shift. And the moment you begin to pull your energy back, the balance of power shifts, sometimes subtly, sometimes violently. You start to see the unseen, the cracks in the foundation, the desperation behind their charm, the manipulation hidden in their concern. You see how much of your life was built not on truth, but on obligation. And suddenly, the cost of your old self becomes clear. You realize how many apologies you gave just to keep others comfortable. How many times you betrayed your intuition to avoid making someone else uncomfortable. How often you said, "I understand," when you didn't. How long you stayed, emotionally, physically, spiritually, in places that were killing your light. And now, as you detach, the fallout begins. People who once depended on your reaction become erratic. Some lash out, others guilt trip, some weaponize your growth. You've changed, as if healing is a betrayal, as if your peace is a threat to their identity. And you begin to understand. You weren't in relationships, you were in systems. Systems that fed on your guilt. Systems that needed you anxious, emotionally entangled, endlessly available. So now, in your silence, the roles collapse. The martyr, the fixer, the emotional buffer, all gone. And the consequence? You begin to grieve a version of yourself you were never supposed to become. You feel the ache of time wasted in proving, pleasing, performing. You feel the sorrow of realizing you loved people who didn't love the real you, only what you provided. You feel the terror of standing alone, untethered from the emotional chaos that once gave your identity a shape. And yet, you also begin to feel something else: space, clarity, power. Because detachment creates distance. and distance creates vision. From this place, you start to see what was once invisible. How often you mistook anxiety for love. How often you confused intensity for intimacy. How often you called manipulation miscommunication. You see how people used your empathy against you. How they played on your trauma, whether they knew it or not. How you were taught that love meant giving until you disappeared. And worst of all, you see how deeply you believe that being emotionally needed was the same as being emotionally cherished. But it's not. Need is not love. Control is not care. Obsession is not intimacy. The consequence of emotional detachment isn't just the reaction of others. It's the reckoning within. The moment you realize you were never truly seen, only used in palatable form. You weren't loved, you were tolerated as long as you didn't disrupt the emotional economy they were addicted to. But now, you're not playing anymore. And the consequence they never expected was this. Without your energy, their illusion falls apart. Because sometimes the most terrifying thing in a relationship is not yelling, not fighting, not conflict. It's indifference, not the cruel kind, but the sacred kind. The kind that says, I no longer need to convince you of my worth. I no longer need to participate in this performance. I no longer offer my energy where it's not honored. And that kind of detachment, it doesn't just change the dynamic. It ends the game. They don't expect you to stop playing your role. They're used to the version of you who bends, who explains, who sacrifices peace for the illusion of harmony. They expect pushback, maybe even anger, but silence? Detachment? That's foreign. That's dangerous. Because that's when you stop being predictable. That's when you start becoming powerful. Rebellion doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Like no longer attending the performance of your own erasure. Like no longer chasing people who only love you when you're bleeding. To break free, you don't need to scream. You need to remember. Remember who you were before you were taught to feel guilty for existing. Before you learned to regulate everyone else's emotions at the cost of your own. Before you believed that love had to hurt, that peace had to be earned, that silence meant rejection. The rebellion is remembering that your emotional availability is a gift, not a debt. So how do you break free? You begin by listening to yourself. That tightness in your chest, that's not drama. That's data. That rising tension when you're around them, that's your nervous system, trying to speak truth before your mind shuts it down with rationalizations. Your body knows when it's being drained. Your heart knows when it's being manipulated. Your soul knows when it's not being seen. Honor that. Set boundaries that don't require permission. Stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Walk away, not because you hate them, but because you've finally remembered you love yourself. That's the rebellion. And it's not easy. You will feel guilt. You will second-guess yourself. You will crave the old chaos because it was once your home. But remember, pain is not always a sign you're doing something wrong. Sometimes, it's proof that you're healing something ancient. You're not abandoning anyone. You're just refusing to abandon yourself any longer. And in this quiet rebellion, something profound happens. You stop giving your energy to those who only showed up when you were in pain. You stop arguing for your value. You stop over-explaining your boundaries. You start protecting your peace like it's sacred. Because it is. The people who truly love you, they'll adjust. They'll meet you where you are. They'll grow. The ones who panic, let them. It's not your responsibility to fix what your silence reveals. Let them feel the weight of their own dysfunction. Let them face the mirror your detachment holds up. That's not cruelty. That's truth. And the truth is this. You were never meant to be emotionally drained just to make others feel full. You were never meant to live your life managing everyone else's chaos. You were meant to be free. And this rebellion, this sacred detachment, isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of a new one. One where you don't have to apologize for your clarity. One where you don't have to shrink to be loved. One where you don't mistake guilt for connection. You're not cold. You're not cruel. You're just finally awake. Here's what they never told you. You were never supposed to carry it all. The pain, the guilt, the responsibility for everyone else's emotions, reactions, healing. But you did. You made yourself smaller to fit into relationships that could never hold the full weight of your truth. You wore the burden like armor. You called it strength. You called it love. But deep down, you were starving for something real. And now, through the silence, through the detachment, through the panic of others, you see the truth rising to the surface like a secret you always knew. The ones who panic when you detach were never holding you. You were holding them. They didn't panic when you were exhausted, apologetic, spiraling. They didn't panic when you stayed silent about your needs. They didn't panic when you cried yourself to sleep. They panicked when you stopped answering to their chaos. They panicked when you said, "This is no longer mine to carry." They panicked when you chose yourself for the first time in a lifetime. And that reveals everything. Real love doesn't panic when you find peace. It doesn't crumble when you stand in your truth. It doesn't punish you for choosing wholeness. Because real love isn't about control. It's about freedom. And you are not selfish for finally reclaiming yours. You are not cruel for protecting your energy. You are not broken for needing space, silence, stillness. You are healing. You are integrating. You are remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. The ultimate truth? Emotional detachment isn't the absence of love. It's the presence of clarity. It's the sacred act of choosing reality over illusion, presence over performance, peace over permission. And when you walk away, calm, centered, no longer trying to be understood, you're not giving up. You're letting go. You're releasing what was never yours to hold. Because in the end, what you'll realize is this. The people who truly see you will not demand your emotional servitude. They will not punish your growth. They will not tremble in the face of your boundaries. They will rise to meet you, not because you forced them to, but because your truth called something higher out of them. And the ones who cannot meet you there, bless them, release them. Let them unravel in the silence they once demanded of you. You're no longer performing. You're no longer explaining. You're no longer participating in dynamics that require your suffering to stay intact. You're finally free, not because the world changed, but because you did. And the ones who panic when you detach, they were never connected to your soul, only your sacrifice. And now, you get to choose differently. So let this be your quiet revolution. Let this be the moment you stop waiting for them to understand, and instead start understanding yourself. Let this be the moment you stop begging to be chosen because you've finally chosen you. And if this truth stirred something in you, don't leave it here. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been apologizing for their silence, mistaking peace for punishment, mistaking guilt for love. Drop a comment below. Tell the truth your younger self was never allowed to speak. Let it echo for someone else who's still afraid to say it out loud. And if you're done shrinking, done overgiving, done carrying what was never yours to bear, subscribe, because this is where we speak the truths that break cycles. This is where we remember who we are beneath the masks, beyond the noise, outside the roles we were forced to play. You don't owe your healing to anyone, but your truth, that's where freedom begins. And it starts right here.